Hey, how's it going? This is Born Optimistic. Thank you. Thank you so much for listening. My name's Donald Scannell. You're listening live at 8 o'clock on a Monday evening on RT Radio 1 Extra, or by the power of the cloud, you're listening somewhere in the world via Stitcher or iTunes. I'm going to do a little bit more chat this week than normal. Those of you who can't wait to get to the Hayes and Cahill interview, we're going to hit that at about 10 minutes in. So, skip forward. But one of the things I would love more, if this isn't a complaint at all, far be it from me to complain. Love doing the show, love your feedback. But I'd love to hear from you in terms of where you are, what you're doing, what you think of the show, any questions. The social media outlets are there, you know them, Twitter, Born Optimistic, Facebook, Born Optimistic Show. But this week, a new mode of communications is going to be opened up to see if this is something you feel happier about, more comfortable with. This is a revolutionary, we're going to open up this medium of email. So if you would like to email me, sharing your thoughts anonymously or otherwise, or questions or observations or hips or tips or hints or suggestions, Donal@BornOptimistic.com. Not very difficult to remember, but I'll say it again just in case, because we're not really ready to take things down as we're listening to podcasts, but you don't need to take this down. Donal@BornOptimistic.com. But I'm really delighted, I have to say, with the flow of comments coming through, with people reviewing on the Apple Store. Now the reviews are great because I love it. It's a double whammy. Get to hear from you, and it improves our kudos in Cloudland. The more reviews, the better. And we're up to 11 reviews, which is pretty good. I mean, a lot of people don't really have any reviews, but obviously we're pushing the review thing. But reviews are great. So our review came in from Shucks85, and the headline is Soul Soothing. Every episode puts a smile on my face. Excellent work, Donal. Well, thank you, Shucks85, whoever you are. I don't know who you are, but thank you. Really appreciate you went to the effort of going on to the App Store and doing a review. Now, I know who this person is because the username is Kavanagh B, which must be Barbara Kavanagh, who is a friend of mine going back years. Like, we worked on the Late Late Show together in the 90s. But, and I know Barbara listens to the show because she tells me and she shares stuff on Facebook. So this must be Barbara Kavanagh. So Barbara Kavanagh, thank you so much to you, and great to have you in Dublin, and great that you're listening to the show. Insightful is Barbara's headline. Love, fate, feminism, teenage angst, death, shamanism, parenting, premonitions, entrepreneurialism, unlocking doors, and being yourself in the world. It's all here. I like that, Barbara. Maybe we should take out some billboards and put that up. I love it. Maybe we need more teenage angst. We'll work on that. We'll work on getting more teenage angst. And thank you to the other reviews. We'll get to you in time to come. And of course, you can keep adding to the reviews by going onto the App Store, the Apple App Store, or Stitcher. So this week, our guest is the first time we've had two guests at one time, which is kind of interesting. Hayes and Cahill, Martin Hayes and Dennis Cahill. I love what I used to call traditional Irish music. People I know who play it, some people are happy with it being called traditional music, some people aren't. Some people consider it traditional, some people don't. But I just love the sounds, and I love the fact that Hayes and Cahill went to India a couple of years ago, and they were marvelling at how the instruments that the people in India had developed in parallel with the instruments being developed in Ireland and used in Ireland, the same instruments, completely different sounds. So there's something very unique and beautiful about this thing we refer to as trad, for want of a better explanation. But what I love about trad, and what most people who play trad seem to love about it too, is the moment when everything, as they say, is locked on, and a groove just connects, whether it's fast or whether it's slow, and the music, it just transports you. It transports players and audience to a different place. And, for me, going to a Hayes and Cahill gig is just something really special that I savour every single time. And my only complaint is the gigs never feel long enough. They're there and then they're not. But when I'm at a Hayes and Cahill gig, I am at peace. Peace in the world reigns. Hayes and Cahill are on stage, and the music they make is just beautiful and incredible and moving and touching. And if you've never heard their music, there's no better place to start than Live in Seattle. Their second album, as they told me in this interview, an amazing record. And the thing about Hayes and Cahill for me is, they say never meet your idols, and I've met quite a few, and I have to be honest, I've only been disappointed a few times. I've enjoyed meeting my idols. But Hayes and Cahill were gents that I had avoided meeting for quite some time. I'd been in the same room as them with mutual friends present, and I'd kind of left the room because I just didn't want this magic bubble burst, I was just afraid of what I might find out, because I loved their music so much, and I was quite happy with that, and I didn't want anything that I was quite happy with that, and I didn't want anything that might lessen the experience. But of course, the more I went to see them live, you just really feel that there couldn't be anything off with these guys. I mean, they're just like, their music is just too perfect, too beautiful, too spot on, too measured to be made by people that were anything but completely rock solid. And that's the great thing about this interview for me is, I came away from this interview loving Hayes and Cahill a little bit more than before I went into it. And of all the interviews I've done for the show so far, it's probably the one I've been the most nervous about, because I just didn't want to mess with that thing and my relationship with that thing. And I guess I probably wouldn't have ever spoken to them if it wasn't for the show, because, I could get them in one place for a bunch of time and know I could get a decent conversation with them, which is one of the great things about this show. You know you're going to sit down with somebody you really admire, and you're going to have enough time for a really good conversation without interruption. And that is probably one of the greatest pleasures there is, really. So we did the interview, and there's a bit of a gremlin attack in the interview, which I'll tell you about afterwards, and there's nice parallels in terms of their story, which I'll stitch it all together afterwards. And we also talk about the gloaming, of which I'll tell you more about afterwards. But Dennis Hayes and Martin Cahill, I think, such a coupling, such a pairing. I'm just, if you're wondering what I'm talking about, just open another browser window if you're at a desktop and call up Live in Seattle. I mean, one of the reasons why there's absolutely no music in this show is so people can choose their own background music. I didn't want to have sound beds that would clash with what else you were doing. But a lot of people listen to the show on their mobile device, so they can't really have two sound sources. But if you're in a desktop scenario, you can open another browser window and queue up Live in Seattle. Or if you're like me, you carry an iPod and a phone, you could have like one pair of headphones for the phone for listening to the podcast, and then or live on the radio, and then you have a bigger set of headphones that slips over the iPhone, and on the iPod you could queue up Hayes and Cahill. So that's one of the main reasons why we're a music free show. A lot of people ask about that. It's so you can choose your own soundtrack. Thank you to Martin Hayes and Dennis Cahill for being so giving of their time, and talk to you on the other side of this wonderful chat with two wonderful people.
So this is a series of documentaries, kind of like, well, not documentaries, like, but...
Well, it's a show called BornOptimistic. It's on every week.
All right.
And the show is all about artists and their worldviews.
All right.
And it kind of harkens back, to how I felt as a kid. And it was music that really inspired my conscience and my morality and my direction. And I feel that music probably deserves a bit more re-elevation in society than it's had over the last few years, So it's me basically as a 45-year-old nearly 45, looking back to the 17-year-old me, and trying to, and I'm doing it for my listeners as well, because it's radio and podcast, it's aimed at people who don't have time. So really time poor people, a lot of whom have kids, who are looking back at their teenage selves and going, what happened? Where did that go wrong? And so in a way, I'm going back to the type of people that would have inspired me as a teenager. Not that you were playing when I was a teenager. But going back to the people that inspired me and finding out how they cope with life. And so the show's called Born Optimistic, and I'm a naive optimistic.
Very good.
And I really appreciate you taking your time to be here. So I'd like to kick off by asking you where you feel you sit on the optimism spectrum, Martin Hayes and Dennis Cahill.
Well, I'd say I'm pretty optimistic as a human being. If you have a life in music, you have to surrender control of a lot of what can happen in your life. And if you do it for long enough and things seem to work out without controlling everything, then you'd have to believe that life is pretty good and that it most likely will continue if you keep applying and addressing life in the same way. You know that it ought to continue in a positive way.
So it's almost, if it ain't broke, don't fix it.
Well, yeah. I mean, I wouldn't fix it. I mean, you know, the things that happen by seeming accident and stuff like that are by chance. You know. A lot of what goes on and happens in life is that, I think, you know. And so my feeling is to stay open to that more and more, to trust it even more.
And Dennis, do you concur? Where do you see yourself on the spectrum of optimism?
It's almost a forced optimism, I think. I mean, if something goes wrong, I make myself get kind of quiet about it and think there's always a way through this. There's a way out. And what I find then is usually you end up with an option that actually could be better. It's just you don't see it because you get so myopic about I have to do this, but sometimes you have to go around it to get it. But opportunities open up. That's in the music business in particular. I think in the arts, you're not going to have stability. That's not a given thing. It's not like you're working, but I don't think there's stability in any job anymore. But so you constantly have to kind of look forward and find things to do. And there's always something. You just have to find a way to make it work.
Well, it's kind of like the rest of the world is now retooling itself as to how musicians and artists have to live.
Yeah.
And maybe in a way that's why I'm turning to artists for guidance.
Well, you see, I mean, I think people... I mean, I remember growing up, like, there was this concept of the pensionable job or permanent employment. You know, permanent public service employment was like prudent parents encouraged people to do this. But as life is moving forward, like, in all likelihood, in a number of years, there won't be such a thing as a job. Like what's happening for young people now, and I see it in Spain and other places. You're becoming your own corporation. You're managing your own life. You're managing your own pension. You're under contract. Nobody's giving you anything. You're under contract all the time to do this. So people aren't employing people anymore. You're in charge of your own personal corporation here. You know. And
when you were growing up, Dennis, were you under pressure to get the job in the bank was the big one when I was growing up, but were you under pressure to get the equivalent of the job in the bank?
Yeah, did. Actually, I was. I actually did work at a bank at one point. During I was in music school, and I worked at a bank. Honestly, it was the longest job I ever had. That was a straight job, and it was for all of 3 months.
Wow!
Because I went back to school with it, and from there. But my mom was just be a banker, you know, and
you have to laugh now, of course.
Well, I had to laugh when the thing crashed, because I remember meeting somebody that worked at a bank, and he was a musician. I said, I bet you're sorry you gave a piano now, because he had nowhere to go with it. He said, I'm still working, you're not.
And of course, you grew up in the wilds of Clare, Martin, if you don't mind me calling fecal.
Oh, pretty much, yeah.
Such. What was the expected trajectory for you as a child?
Well, you see, I mean, I grew up loving music, and it was the number one passion in my life, all through my life, you know. But it never occurred to me that I could have a career doing this. And so I went to what's now University of Limerick and studied business.
Wow.
Yeah.
I can't picture that.
Well, neither can I, and neither could anybody else apparently, because I never actually ended up doing that. But
I'd say you're a canny man all the same.
nah, not really. No, I'm more of a kind of a. I don't approach. I mean, I'm aware of what's going on in the business world and political world and things like that, for sure. But I operate by different principles, largely speaking. Because like a life in the arts is going to force you to live making what are on one hand seeming like non-pragmatic, irrational choices. Like the decision to pursue the most passionate element of a piece of music is not in itself a rational choice, And
I'm intrigued as to at what stage your lives intersected. I assume it was after you emigrated to America is when you met Dennis. So just to put that in context, what age were you when you went to America? Why did you go to America? Was that to pursue music or what?
Yeah, well, I mean, after I finished doing the bit of business education in Limerick, I actually tried to run. I'm glad this never worked out. I've never talked about this, but it's horrible. Like it was kind of providing lunchtime meals in factories, like around the Midwest region. It was like this little business, but it absolutely went belly up.
Wow.
And so I was at a loss. And I'd also managed to if my business wasn't going well, I managed to break my left ankle, which meant I couldn't drive, and so my business just went kaput, like. And there were a few friends who had they kind of had a wedding band, and stuff like that. It really wasn't probably my thing, but they says, we're going to the States for a few months. You want to come? And I go, yeah, let's get the hell out of here, And so I headed to America, and with basically the plan that I would pay off the debts that I had accrued here, yeah, and stuff. So that took longer than I thought. And so I ended up being there. And
where did you land in America?
Chicago. Well, I was all over the East Coast, but the last gig was in Chicago, so we stayed there. And the music, it was okay, but I was. Well, as I was reading yesterday in Fintan O'Toole, that I didn't want to call myself an illegal alien. I'll call myself, I was undocumented.
Undocumented.
Okay, I was undocumented. And
of course, Dennis, documentation was never a problem for you.
No. But it forced me into music. Like I worked in the construction site for a little while, and I didn't like that too much. So, but music was an option for the undocumented, and so it actually propelled me into a music career in spite of myself. So you'd have to think like that there are forces at play in this universe that make you do the thing you're supposed to do, or at least encourage you in that direction. Because I probably never would have become a professional musician had I stayed here and had I not been forced into that predicament.
And where were you born, Dennis?
Chicago. You
were born in Chicago. So to take the timeline up to speed, what of significance happened in your life before you guys met?
I was making a living. I went from one type of music to the other, and I was what they would call over there a jobbing musician. You call and you take the job, and Chicago's a great town for work. There's a lot of conventions, there's all sorts of stuff, so you can work a lot if you make contacts, and so you'd kind of just farm out gigs, and then eventually people would call me, and if I couldn't do it, I'd find a musician for them. So I had this thing where the guy I gave the gig to would call me because he owed me one, and then the other people would always call me because I'd find someone for him. So there were a couple of us doing this. We were just passing gigs around. No commissions, because you were better just getting a free gig from them. So you did okay with it. There's a lot of work in Chicago, too.
And Conor Byrne told me something very interesting. The flautist? What would you call him, a flautist?
Yeah.
Conor Byrne, the flautist.
In polite society, yeah.
Now based...
The flute player.
The flute player.
The flute guy, yeah.
Generally, he would go to the Willie Clancy week as a flute player, less likely as a flautist. He wouldn't be flouting his flautism. He wouldn't be...
He's not in the James Galway territory.
Yeah.
But for anyone who's been to a Hayes and Cahill gig, they might find this next bit of information slightly unusual. But Conor Byrne told me that you, Dennis Cahill, used to be a stand-up comedian.
No, I worked with a stand-up comedian.
But to be fair, he was kind of, you know, the way in American TV you would have seen like the main late night comedian and his sidekick. Dennis was a kind of a comedian sidekick, so he used to put these little unexpected asides into the middle of these comedic routines that would throw things in all kinds of directions. So he did actually work as a kind of a quasi-cynical comedian. Just in case he doesn't tell you.
I was kind of the straight man, and basically I made fun of the comedian.
Yeah.
And occasionally someone in the audience, if it popped up. I mean, I think the worst. Well, it wasn't. It was one of the ones that. See, the best part about doing that part of it is he has to keep being funny. And I get to sit there, and if the situation opens up, I got all day to write something, you know. And I remember a guy came in. He always did nationalities, and this guy stands up and he says he's an Indian, and he said, like, from India, and he said, no, I'm Cherokee. And this is a dinner show thing, and there's about 300 people in the room, and I know this comedian has no Indian jokes. I know this is a fact because I knew everything. Yeah. So he turns to me, he says, what do you think about that? He's an Indian. And I looked into the mic. I said, "Do you have a reservation?" I couldn't wait. I couldn't wait for it. It was so wide open.
I now see parallels between Hayes and Cahill.
Yeah. So that's what he was doing when I saw him in Chicago.
Well, can you remember the first time you met? You set eyes on each other.
Okay. This is a tricky one now because Dennis disagrees with this version of reality. Like I was working on the construction site in Chicago, and I got invited. Well, there was this priest from Clare, Father T.J. Maloney. He was a good friend, but he was trying to help me out, you know. So I says, you should come over to Tom Fox's, this restaurant and stuff like. And this is where I saw Dennis and was playing with George Casey from Mullock, and he had organised it. I'll get Martin to play a couple of tunes here. He'll sit in with Dennis and these
blind
guys.
Date,
you know.
of sorts.
Yeah. So I sat in for a tune, like, and I played. No, Dennis hadn't played much Irish music at that point, so I wouldn't say it was like hectic, you know.
Yeah.
But he burned me off the stage with a bunch of bluegrass after that, like that I couldn't play at all, and I was left limping off the stage really. So this was my first experience with Dennis. Like, you know, it's hard to believe we're friends, like that we actually survived that occasion. Like, but
what did you make of the hairy upstart? I assume he was hairy then as well.
Wasn't
No,
he wasn't.
Short-haired country farmer boy kind of look.
He also kind of met me at a point where I actually couldn't stand doing this gig anymore. It was driving me crazy, and it was just a thing. You get an attitude when you're working a gig you don't like. It had nothing to do with the other guy. I just should have been doing something else because it was more about doing comedy than it was playing music, and so that was the thing. So I probably wasn't the most pleasant human being. I wasn't pleasant to anybody at that point.
He was an edgy guy at that time.
I was edgy.
He was an extremely relaxed human being at this point in his life.
You would get
bit. Edgy.
That was all there was to it. It even got to that point in the show with the comedian. I was the guy that hammered somebody if they were heckling. You know.
So has a zen come over you since? Because you seem like a pretty chilled individual.
I'm having a good time now. These were long hours with people yelling at you all the time.
I'll give it my assessment of that now. I mean, like, it was an interesting, you know, some people complain that they're not getting to do in life what they want to do, right? And they complain and they complain. But even when they get to do what they want to do, they're still complainers, right? But Dennis used to complain about not getting to do what he wanted to do in life. But as soon as he did get to do what he wanted to do, he actually stopped complaining.
What was that thing?
Well, he get to play music in a way and in a focused way that he wanted to play it, and have the freedom to do that. I remember I could say Dennis's personality changed.
That's incredible.
Well,
you know, to a sense, you know.
It was the point of, like, there's something about sitting down with some piece of music you like, and like, I love sitting around figuring things out to do, like trying things against it. What can I bring out? What's the melody like? And detailing and stuff. And getting little things done, and when you're stuck in a situation where you're having to do things you don't like, and there's nothing you can do with the music anyway, it's just, I'm sitting there thinking, you know, this is, I could cut my head off and do this. I mean, I worked in bands where literally we played like dance bands and stuff, and you'd play the same thing in a row. And if we were playing this particular tune, it was 10 o'clock because it was like a track.
Oh, God.
And at one point they got a new bass player, and he said, "What key is this in?" I said, "I don't have a clue," because my hands were just
Automatic
playing.
pilot.
But now with this, I remember with Martin, with the first tour we did, and we were in Norway, and I used to just love going into the hotel room and finding these.
I get a knock on the door.
I come over.
I have these chords. What do you think of this? Like, I have this idea. What do you think of this? And so it was. It started out as a very good working relationship.
And did you have a light bulb moment? Like, did you kind of go, "I know what this guy needs. It's me," or did you say, "I need this guy"? Like, you were the instigator. I'm taking it.
Well, Dennis became a kind of something of a gateway for me into a different music culture in Chicago as well. And I also knew that like he knew how to play a lot of genres. I was more attracted to somebody who could play in other genres than just, we'll say, traditional Irish music, because I always felt there was some connections I needed to make there. There was something I needed to understand, something I needed to learn. So initially, after being in Chicago a few years and just kind of knowing each other, I finished playing with this particular kind of ballad singer. I was playing in bars. Well, it was awful. My experience of doing things musically I didn't want to do was truly awful. But I feel like things like that make you deeply appreciate when things are actually working well. There's never a day when I do a gig now that I don't appreciate how wonderful it is and what a good experience that is, because I've seen it and experienced it in a very different way also. But anyway, after a few years of that,
how long ago are we talking about?
In the mid 80s. Yeah.
It's that long.
Oh yeah. We've been on the road.
We've known each other a long time.
We've been on the road for like 22 years.
We've been friends for our whole adult life.
Yeah.
Wow.
We're longer than McCartney and Lennon, longer than Simon and Garfunkel.
We've probably done as many gigs as all them put together too. I mean, it started. The first tour started in '95.
Yeah, but this is there were years
but there were years before that.
But we had a band in Chicago together in the 90s. We shared a house. We
You lived together?
We did, in a house. No, we're not gay. But there you go. But no, it was like a musician's house hangout, where we.
Because seeing you live, when you play together, the thing that amazes me and so many, when we go to a Hayes and Cahill gig, we go to the pub afterwards and we talk about it, and we're like going, when Dennis did that thing, that was just at the time when Martin did that thing, really mind-blowing things that I can't imagine you rehearsing, but at the same time, I can't imagine coming off anything other than this deep.
Well, it's not, with a melody thing, there's a certain thing that's going to happen. And, if he does one thing, I know if he goes in a phrase one way, he's going to do this. I look at backing tunes like backing a singer.
Yeah.
It's the same thing. And my whole approach, I get this whole thing, this minimalism. Mm-hmm. You live or die by the melody line, whether it's somebody singing it or playing it. Yeah. That's the thing, because people really don't, the rhythm thing, the only time they notice is usually when it's in the way, unless it's just a rhythmic thing you're doing completely. But these tunes are beautiful, and the melody lines are beautiful, and you do what you can to bring them out. And
you serve that.
Yeah, well,
you just
we
both
do actually.
Yeah.
It's less obvious in my case, because I'm playing it, so it looks like, hey, it's Martin doing his thing, but as I teach workshops, I do all kinds of things. Like my playing is not about my playing. My playing is my own devotion to revealing the beauty of that melodic line, and to revealing all the potential I think it has. And so I really asked Dennis to engage in this same process with me. So whether it's a subtle contribution or a large contribution, whichever it is, it's the collective of the contribution together, big or small, is in a sense in the end result equal. It's just whatever is required to make the full experience of that melody be something we can feel deeply, And
what do you think is in these melodies for the audience? What do you think they contain?
There's beauty, wisdom, love, passion, soulfulness, a sense of who we are as a people. there's the wisdom of a generation of uneducated musicians from the mountains. There's the wisdom that's contained within that. There's the beautiful artistic sensitivity of people that we never realized were artists. There are so many things like channeled into these little melodic lines, and they're recognizable and understandable across all cultural boundaries. And that's a remarkable thing. I mean, because of the universality of the musical language, and it's just like, and the universality of Irish music is not achieved by watering it down. It's achieved by going right into the heart of it, and that's the amazing thing. So, like, the music form is incredible. It's incredible, and it also, because it's a simple music, it demands of you humility, because you can't boast about what you do with this. You can't outrank other music forms because it's simple to play. You can't, so it makes you have to be humble, whether you like it or not, or whether you want to be. You have to be.
Do you concur?
Oh, definitely. I remember having that argument about somebody who played Irish music very technically and, really went for the dazzle stuff, it's another factor of doing it. And they were going on about it, and I just said, well, when you start doing this thing, you're flying up and down the neck on a violin and stuff. I mean, all over the place and putting a lot of things into it. You're showboating.
Yeah.
I said, okay, if you're going to get into the tech part of it, this was my argument. If you wrote it down, if you had somebody who wrote it down exactly like they played it, and you handed it to, say, somebody who came out of Berkeley that was getting their doctorate in this and as a performer, they'd be able to read it and they'd be able to nail it. Get them to try and do Paddy Canny. They'd have no idea how to work the bow technique. They'd have no idea how to get the phrasing that way, because that you have to learn by understanding the music. It's not on a piece of paper. You have to hear that. And that takes a lifetime. It does.
Yeah, but anything takes a lifetime. But the lifetime is a very easy thing to attribute to this if it's an enjoyable experience.
Yeah.
It's like, hey, I've worked so hard for this. It's not like that. I mean, I didn't work so hard for it. I just love doing it.
I'm assuming or guessing with a surname like Cahill or Cahill, there might be some Irish roots.
Parents from the Dingle Peninsula, Cahill originally.
So my question then was, did Martin bring this music to you, or was this music already in your life?
I had heard some of it. I'd heard some of it. I remember hearing the Chieftain's first album and the Bothy Band and things like that, and I really liked it. Some of it I really thought was incredible.
But it wasn't the same as growing up in Fecal, where it's...
Yeah, I mean, he wasn't, like, let's say, he wasn't really playing trad music when I met him. It was part of the attraction, because, like, I said, well, here's my idea of traditional music.
And this thing that you felt about things not being done right and you wanted to do them a certain way, was this something that you had building up inside you for a long time and you were waiting for an outlet for it? Yeah, no, I mean, like, I kind of hit the ground off axis from how this music was being played, essentially, but not as obscurely as one would imagine, because I actually was listening to very old musicians that were largely being not heard, not understood. Now, they weren't all technical geniuses. In fact, few of them were. But their point of view and their understanding and what it is they were looking to achieve and experience in music was magical. It was beautiful. And so I kind of immersed myself in that understanding of music and that way of seeing it. And out in the larger world, there weren't that many musicians to collaborate with on that idea. That idea of a feeling music as opposed to like a music about feeling, And were your heroes people that were accessible to you, people that you knew?
Oh, I knew them, yeah. And they would have been... My father was a fiddle player, of course, and he was the prime access for me and the prime motivation in many ways. But through him and my uncle Paddy Canny and all the fiddle players of West Clare and East Clare, I knew them quite well. and had experienced them up close, had listened to them in conversation, had seen them in my house. People like Tommy Potts from Dublin used to come down, used to spend evenings in the house, and they'd play and they'd talk and they'd play and they'd talk. So I was immersed in that from early childhood.
And I always felt that, for me, having dealt with all kinds of musicians from all different genres, trad musicians roll a certain way. There's a certain way trad musicians navigate the world that I think is kind of quite unique. And in a way, I see a lot of comparisons between trad and graffiti. If you know what I mean, in the sense that it's not done with an immediate reward path or an immediate feedback loop.
That's correct. Yeah, there's not, like, in fact, one does it for the sake of doing it. Like, this is essentially a thing, and there is a community and a sense of belonging as well that comes with it. But that's essentially the only peripheral reward. But the music itself is the reward. And
so how receptive was America? I mean, so Hayes and Cahill started in America.
Yeah.
Could Hayes and Cahill have gotten to where you are today if you had started in Ireland as opposed to America, is what I'm really asking.
I don't think so. I don't think so, actually. I think America, we were in Chicago, which is, even though it's a big city and stuff, it's marginal in a way. It's not the East Coast, it's not the West Coast, it's kind of somewhere out there. And so I got to spend many, many years experimenting with, like, complete freedom. And without, under the glare of, or like popping your head up and getting hit down before you get started, which often happens. Like, so we had plenty of time to make false starts, plenty of time to experiment with things that didn't work out, plenty of time to make a fool of yourself, trying to do this and trying to do that. And then I left it all behind and went to the West Coast, and I left Dennis behind then.
When was this?
In the early 90s. Well, it was all got to do with relationships and women. Like almost every technical, physical move in my life from one city to another has been as a result of that. And so I ended up in Seattle.
And how did you feel at this point?
Well, we had that band, and it was it was an innovative band, but
it was innovative, could fail to reach its potential.
It couldn't get anywhere because it was my friend, a good friend of mine from the north, came to see it, and he was perfectly honest. He says, it's a great band, they're great musicians, but he said, after about a half hour, I have to go home and lie down because it was just an assault.
A fusion?
It was a fusion, frantic,
all electric,
high energy, all electric, in your face. It was everything that my sensitive soul didn't ever really want.
Young, dumb, and full of cum.
It had some of that. Yeah. It definitely. But again, part of the reason for that too is that that's what you think you have to do.
Mm-hmm. But I'm trying to get it. Did Dennis feel like a dejected, neglected soul when you upped sticks and went to? Was it Seattle?
Seattle, but the band had kind of broken up before.
So
that.
Hayes and Cahill wasn't like the thing.
No, there was no Hayes and Cahill.
There was no Hayes and Cahill.
No, the band had broken up. We were friends. We were the central component of the band, nonetheless. I think but
so for me, like live in Seattle, which I think, what year was that?
Somewhere in the mid-90s, I suppose, like late 90s. Late 90s?
Yeah, that was the second album.
Was it 1999 or something? Or?
So yeah, to be pretty closer to that.
Live in Seattle, I think that the first time I ever saw you was in the Temple Bar Music Centre, probably to launch Live in Seattle in Ireland. And I've listened to that album, I don't know how many times, but I have no sense whatsoever of where it was recorded or how that came about or what that room was like. And in a way, I don't want you to tell me.
You don't?
I've heard it so many times, and I have no idea.
It's fun.
I have no idea.
Well, the other funny thing about it is we actually recorded it. We had no engineer.
There was no
engineer. We just set up the
involved.
stuff and we hit go. That's why the last track, how it fades out, we ran out of tape.
And so we weren't backstage. We didn't know that we had run out of tape.
So we had to
that had to be a fade out.
I feel robbed. But for anyone who has no idea about Hayes and Cahill, that album for me is the absolute perfect place to start.
Because it's the closest thing to what happens when we do a concert, of course. Like we tended to kind of look at music differently when we're in the studio and just kind of mulling around in a more contemplative kind of way. But the live performance, like I remember hearing after we had done our Lonesome Touch album, people says, "But you guys sound so much different in concert." So I kept hearing this, and I kept going, "Well, I think we better actually let people hear something of what they might expect if they were ever coming to hear us, you know."
And was there feedback right from the start in terms of? I mean, I find your music very transformative. I suppose it just you lock in and you kind of forget about everything except the music. Were you getting that kind of feedback from people right from the start?
Yeah, and I mean the way you describe it is basically what we try to do as players. It's the kind of experience we're looking to have ourselves, and so we're always happy if we can hear somebody say that, yeah, that's how I'm experiencing it, because that's the ultimate of what we're trying to achieve in that sense. But yeah, I mean we've been edging towards that for a while, I suppose.
And when did you know you were hitting the mark, Dennis? When, like?
Well, I think when the first album came out, I was more worried about it. But you told me, like, there's something about letting go of an album and you're not sure what you're going to get, because I wasn't a trained guitar player, and I'm going to get,
he thought he was going to get murdered.
Yeah, I thought I was going to get murdered because I'm not playing like anything anybody did. And I'm thinking, oh, they're going to kill me. But they were pretty generous about the whole thing. They did. Some of the ones that didn't like it just didn't mention me at all, and then some people liked it, so it was fine. And
so what was it like then, kind of bringing Dennis back to Ireland? It's like introducing the Mott to the family.
Oh yeah. Well, like, I mean, yeah, in a sense, yeah, because he came over here. People like. You came before we'd made the record, I think, didn't you?
Yeah, but I kind of went to... I went and saw my uncle out in Kerry and stuff like that.
But like we arrived to play at the Fakel Festival, like the local village.
Oh, that was the scariest.
Back in East Clare, and this was like Dennis was like, Steve Cooney was there.
Cooney's
There were
there.
all kinds of people. Like,
and then an odd thing with Cooney is I had a friend of mine went to Ireland, and I had a guitar I was going to sell, and he says, "I'll sell it back in Ireland." He sold it to Steve Cooney, and the first time I met him was at a festival, and he ran up to me, and he said, "I have your guitar. Look, I didn't do anything to it yet," because he hadn't played it.
He hadn't trashed it yet.
He hadn't trashed it yet.
Steve does trash
it's your guitar.
so,
You can do whatever. But then we played at the festival in Clare, and then I was really nervous because this is the hometown for him, and this is like one of the core places. And Steve was on the same bill, and he came back and he put his arm. He said, "It's going to be great. I heard you on the radio. It's really great." He was just like this coach.
Had you been to Ireland before? Had you been to Ireland before this first?
Just as a vacation, years and years before. But yeah, this was like, because this is like not knowing whether I actually knew what I was doing and being thrown into the front line.
I mean, you chose the place to start. If you can make it there, you can make it anywhere.
Yeah. But actually, the first gig you did was at the Galway Arts Festival. Like, as part of that run in, the first gig you did was you were accompanying my father and Francie Donlan at the two old-time fiddle players now at the Galway Arts Festival. It was.
I remember that. Yeah. I do remember that. That was so because we came in off the road. I'm wearing this rumpled shirt and jeans, and we hadn't, I shaved or anything, and they're up there and they're perfect. They're dressed perfectly, and I looked like some guy they found on the street, a busker, to come in and sit in with them.
And were people receptive and positively accepting of what you're doing?
Well, as far as we were concerned, yes. Like, as far as we knew. But apparently there was a significant resistance. Like right from the beginning, I think, with my first album, like before I even made the albums, I made 2 albums before Dennis and I collaborated then again, because I after moving to Seattle, and I worked with Randall Bass, I worked with Steve Cooney, but then I wanted to kind of work with somebody where I could advance the idea and it would continue changing and evolving. And that's when I called Dennis, and then we came back to Ireland and did all this. So we picked up a number of years later. But yeah, what was the question again?
The reaction.
The reaction, yeah.
When you brought
the reaction, like, apparently some people hated it, like, and some people loved it, and so that's fine, I mean, you can't, like, you can't have universal acclaim.
It's kind of like, I'm not in general a very precious person, and Hayes and Cahill gigs are incredibly special to me, and I'm glad you don't play that often, because too much of a good thing, it can be a bad thing as well. But the whole kind of gloaming thing is something that I haven't dipped my toe. I've bought the albums, but I haven't gone to the shows, and I don't, and I'm going tonight. I think I am. I'm supposed to be going. And I'm just, I'm kind of a bit nervous in a way. I've seen all of the individuals many times, but do you know what I mean? I feel.
Well, it's essentially.
Maybe I'm overthinking.
No, I would. Yeah, I wouldn't think too hard about this. I mean, we don't even. So it's like, but essentially, I think, like in the case of earless singing. It's like it goes straight to the heart of a Shannon song. It goes straight to the heart of a song. And in the case of a tune being played, when I'm playing a tune, we still go to the heart of the tune. Like that's still driving it, So it's just a very big elaborated version of maybe what Dennis and I do in many ways,
But like the gloaming was initiated on the back of a Hayes and Cahill freak. Doveman following you around every gig on a tour, like that was the genesis of it, was it? Or
well, yeah, I mean, I've known him since that period, and so I've known him for a long time, right? But it's a bit like Dennis as well, in that, like, when I wanted to create this idea, bringing in Thomas was like bringing a guy who had his hands in many different musical worlds now as well. And so but I also knew that he knew my world, and that he knew the world of this music as well. And it was like kind of an effort to bring all these different attributes together at once.
So did you want something more then that Hayes and Cahill wasn't giving you? Well, was that how you perceived it, Dennis? Like from your thing, like when you're talking about needs and wants.
Yeah, I think it's good to put things together like that, because it makes you think out of the box. The thing will expand. I mean, when we go back to playing like we play, if we do a duo thing, and then we expand in our own way that way. Mm-hmm. But when you're with this other thing, now you got to make a little room, and you got to figure out how to work things.
It was about taking pressure off of this duet as well.
Which it did.
Like the pressure to make all the money, the pressure to sell all the gigs, the pressure to keep coming up with new stuff, the pressure all the time. So it was just kind of like a release valve.
But as a fan, I feel that, because there's not a pressure for Hayes and Cahill to get bigger and bigger and bigger. And I love that, because I remember that trajectory, and I remember going with it, and I remember asking myself, where is it going to stop? And that was really cool. So the weird thing, like, this show is normally a lot more philosophical, in that we don't talk about music and the minutiae of it. But the weird thing is that what I get, what Hayes and Cahill fans will not get, but what listeners who don't know Hayes and Cahill won't get, is that for me the politics of the surrounding world is almost the subtext of your shows. It's almost like what you're bringing is all in away from, and what isn't really mentioned.
That's right, yeah. Because you see, like, I mean, what's really true, like in life, and no matter what the political situation is, like, the antidote, like, is truthfulness, heartfulness, openness, trusting, love, joy, passion. Those are always a good antidote to what's going on in the world. I'm actually I think both of us are, like, quite political in our thinking, quite, like, animated by that, but we rarely speak about it, and sometimes, in a complicated, confusing world where you take opposing sides on issues, the truth is never on one end of any opposing side. It's actually somewhere mixed in the middle of all of this. The truth is spread everywhere. So it's kind of like, but in music, you can go for an absolute truth of soulful, heartful, joyful, unimpeded, trusting expression, like, you can't argue with it, and I mean, it's not something you always achieve, but it's something you're always yearning to achieve, and it's a depth and a truth of something that you always want to have happen, if possible. And so every gig, every moment of every performance is simply directed at that, and is, to a greater or lesser degree, succeeding in getting there, And there are high moments, and there are moments of almost high, and whatnot, But
so quite literally, I mean, Dennis, that the music is the answer.
Well, it definitely makes people feel something and question things, which is great. there's a reason when people take over countries, they stop music. It's one of the first things they go to, because you're one good anthem away from a revolution. Pretty much. It's dangerous. It is dangerous because it cuts right to the chase. It cuts absolutely to the chase, and it's very interesting that it would have that. And you add lyrics into it, and it gets really dangerous at that point. But it.
You haven't pressed the nuclear option yet.
But there is a thing about it, because it's a universal language. It will work. It makes people think and feel things. And
how central was it to the 60s movement?
Yeah.
Music was like... And people would imagine that it's not just lyrics, you know? It's like people can experience joy and love and euphoria in all kinds of ways in music, and I think it's just a positive thing to put into the world. You know, it's a meaningful thing. This is why you end up, as we go back to the beginning of the conversation, like, you know, you have to trust all of this stuff.
And when you were growing up, Dennis, like at what stage did music become the thing? Like, what was that process like? When did you start getting really into music, and when did you realize that music was going to be your life?
Probably about 10 or 11, you know, and then it just kind of went from there. And then I tried to talk myself, and if you're going to be a professional musician, you got to go to school and do this. And so I did, and walked out of there thinking there's really not, you know, I learned what I found in school. I'm not saying school is useless. It isn't. But what it does, it won't prepare you for the real world of doing it. But it does give you a reference of where to look for things that help your problems, and because you can't. I mean, there's a thing of that you know, there's things you're going to learn when you get out there, because people don't follow the rules. You know, this is, you know, in the book.
And who were the musicians that kind of piqued you, that became your focus, or, you know, kind of started dragging you in this direction? Who was it?
Well, there were a bunch. I mean, there was the folk thing. You know, you had Pete Seeger, and you had, you know, Goodman was around, and Prine, and those guys. I was part of that little folky thing there for a while. I was like...
So, okay. Some explaining to do, okay? So Martin Hayes and Dennis Cahill, as they explained in that interview, their live in Seattle, live recording, ended prematurely because something went wrong with the recorder backstage. I didn't even want to know too much about their whole process, because, again, I didn't want the bubble to be burst. But our conversation in RT Studios went on a lot longer than what we've presented to you here, because we had a gremlin attack. So I kind of, you know, I played down to like a weird parallel force where, you know, live in Seattle got cut off prematurely. Our interview got cut off prematurely. But I'm very, very happy with what's there. I'm very, very happy with what we had to share with you. And there's no real massive moment that happened after the recording got gremlinized, because you have the sense of them there, you know. So to fill in a bit of extra detail, so in the interview, I was talking about how, you know, the gloaming, I was kind of, you know, in retrospect, I was overthinking the whole thing, but I kind of avoided the gloaming. Never went to any of their gigs until the night we recorded that interview in RT, in the middle of their 7-night run in the National Concert Hall. So on the night of that recording, there was a friend of mine going who had a spare +1 on the guest list. I had to bring my son to soccer training, which finished at 8, which was the same time as the gig was going to start. And, you know, Martin said to me, "So you're going to come to the gig or not?" And I was like, well, I'll try, you know, I'll try and give it a go, and I'll give it a lash. I'll try, you know. And of course, you know, the pressure's on them, because there's this band you've been avoiding for so long because you worship the music that 2/5 of them make. And then the other 3/5 of the band I'm also a big fan of, like Iarla O'Leonard. Like, he's never put out anything I haven't loved. Dove Man I love his piano playing. Caoimhín O'Reilly, I adore his fiddle playing. So all of the constituent parts I loved individually. And apart from musically, what I loved about the gloaming in theory was the gloaming, you know, keep a lid on how big Hayes and Cahill needed to be. And that seemed to be the plan as well, which I kind of found out on the day. Is like, Hayes and Cahill gets to be this thing that stays at a certain level, and then the gloaming is this thing that, you know, does 7 nights in the National Concert Hall. So I was kind of grateful for that, because it took the pressure off Hayes and Cahill to fill the space available. But I was just, loving Hayes and Cahill so much. I wondered as to, how I could possibly love the gloaming as much. And if I went to a gloaming gig and didn't like it as much as Hayes and Cahill, would that affect how much I liked Hayes and Cahill? Because for me, I know I love something by how much I consume it. And I listen to Hayes and Cahill a lot. Don't listen to the gloaming ever. So that was the thing for me. And I never made a decision, but it just wasn't there. So anyway, decide to go to the gig. My friend is on the guest list. And what I didn't realise was in the National Concert Hall, they put all the guest list in the front row, because the front row isn't considered sellable seating because your head is at a steep angle. They're amazing seats, but they don't sell that first row normally for a gig. So arrive at the gig nearly an hour late, about 9:15, 9:10, I arrive in. Not only is my friend with the spare seat, my very good friend Jim Carroll, who I've known and loved for a long time. We've been friends, God, since 1991. So Jim's there in the centre of the front row. The seat for me is beside him. And I kind of cop this as I'm walking down the steps to take my seat. So the empty seat that I sit in is literally at Martin Hayes' feet. The lights aren't super low, so I come in between a gap in the songs, sit in the seat, and it's like I get the nod off Martin, like, "Harry and welcome." And I'm like, oh my God, talk about pressure to like the gig. You're literally 6 feet from the feet of the guy that afternoon who you were like, "Oh, I'm not sure about the gloaming, not sure if I'm going to like it, but I'll give it a go." So I'm there, and I'm like, oh jeez. And so for the first couple of tracks, I was just like, I literally didn't know where to look. And when Doveman came on and started doing piano stuff, I was like, oh great, something else to look at, So then after a while I got over myself, as you do, you just got to go for it. So I closed my eyes, which I actually do at Hayes and Cahill gigs a lot anyway. Just close my eyes and just let it transport me away. And there's a gloaming track called Sarah, Sarah, which is one of Jim Carroll's all-time favourite songs. It's on the Gloaming's first album. And Sarah, Sarah, don't ask me how many times I played that on YouTube after the gloaming gig. It's just so beautiful, so precious, so special. And the gloaming, ticked a lot of boxes. I was very, very glad it ticked. Annette Martin afterwards, he shook my hand and he asked me what I thought. I was able to tell him I loved it, and I did absolutely adore it. And I can't wait to see the gloaming again, but I still prefer Hayes and Cahill. Don't ask me why. Maybe I'm just stubborn. I don't know. But I love both of them, and I'm really glad they exist. And this thing that we used to call traditional music, I adore. And there's a whole other side to it as well. So, the gloaming and Hayes and Cahill are like at 1 BPM level of it. They're on the mellow air kind of end of it. But then there's the jigs and reels, like the faster stuff, which Hayes and Cahill and the gloaming sometimes veer into the bottom end of tempo-wise. But there's the really faster stuff, which I also adore, like I completely love. Which is why I've got myself wrapped up in this thing called Call the Dancers, which is an experiment that's running on Tuesday nights for the next about 10 weeks in Whelan's on Wexford Street in Dublin. So the idea, the quest, the plan is, if you take traditional music and if you get the best songs of a certain tempo, we're looking at like 122 to 176 BPM, which is like from house music to techno. Like this is real dance floor speeds and it's got a real dance floor rhythm. If we find the best tunes within that tempo And if these tunes are then recontextualized and put up in a way where anyone can get into them, can we bring trad to a new audience? Because there's a whole bunch of trad fusion stuff going on that ultimately I personally, honestly find a little bit annoying. So this is about seeing if we can take the pure drop, like acoustic instruments. That's the way to define it. Acoustic instruments playing music that may have been written now, that may have been written 100 years ago, that may have been written hundreds of years ago. But that sense, that sound, where could it go? So Ronan Usnuddig from Keela is the man at the centre with Baron, flanked by Owen Dillon, formerly of Keela, now gone solo, one of the greatest uilleann pipe players in the world. For my money, the Jimi Hendrix of uilleann pipes. He's just absolutely insanely brilliant. So every week in this 13-week run, we're about to do the third week of it, matching them with different musicians and just seeing what happens and seeing what magic happens. And if this little lab experiment works, we'll see where it goes and we'll see what it could lead to. But that's my other side of trad and the other bit of trad that I really, really adore. So it's called The Dancers, Tuesdays in Whelan, 7 to 9 in the front bar until the end of June, unless they kick us out sooner. And the good news is it's completely free. It's completely free, and so come and check it out. I need to thank my good friend Conor Byrne, the flute player who we referred to in the interview there, who introduced me to Ellie Byrne, who handles the PR for Hayes and Cahill. Ellie, thank you so much for setting up the interview. Thanks, of course, to Martin and Dennis for giving up their time. Thanks to Gary Sheehan and all the staff at the National Concert Hall who have just made Martin Hayes an artist in residence. You can read more about that on nch.ie. Thank you to Roddy at Art19, Kevin Casey at Snow Furnace, Zoe at Team Zodo Pa B. Thanks to Eric Troutful and Louise Toll in RT. And thank you to my executive producer in RT, Martina McGlynn. Martina, thank you so much. Born Optimistic is a snowfurnace.com production. Thank you so much for listening, and until next week, goodbye.